Thank you very much for having me. It's funny that the first time I do a lecture, so to speak, of architecture in Orlando, that the subject has to, it's ugly. And, but I'll spin that in a good way in a second. So forgive me if I'm a little punchy. I've slept like 4 hours in the last 48 just because it's a busy time to be an architect in Orlando, but that's a good thing. And so instead of just presenting a slideshow of my work, which, we can make that interesting. I do have images of work I'm going to share with you, but there's a kind of a different narrative that pays some respect to this idea of ugly, and I'll work through that with you. So I came to Orlando about 10 years ago, in 2004, when it was a booming time in architecture, and I came to work in a very large firm, and at the time, we were all doing like condominiums downtown, and Orlando was starting to grow again. And as I participated in that process, working in someone else's firm that was very large, I got to learn a lot about this town, but at the same time I also got to learn a lot about process with respect to architecture, and how that whole kind of linear process of starting with an idea and ultimately arriving at physical space there was opportunity in that hadn't been realized, at least what I had seen in terms of engaging people with that here in Orlando. And then at the same time, I thought the longer that I worked in Orlando, that there was a lot of ugly and a lot of good things too. And it was a town that when I think a long time ago there was like a question and answer thing on the Orlando and online that I did, and they asked me what I liked about Orlando. And I think it was that I said that I loved and hated it equally. And I think as a person in a creative industry, that gave us a lot to work with. So I'm going to work through a couple of ideas here, and at the end I think we do some questions, so we'll do that. So ugly is something to work with, and I think there's some opportunity we can realize there. This is the landscape I come from. I'm not originally from Orlando. I'm from Northwest Florida, a place called Destin, Santa Rosa Beach on the Gulf of Mexico. And like that's not Florida to a lot of people. Like pretty much once you get past Tallahassee, it's not Florida. But this is what I was around every day. And so, very different than here. And kind of early on, kind of being brought up in that literal landscape, I think that in the absence of a lot of the good things we have here, I kind of had a thirst to try and go out and find something and to find some way to engage not only with that landscape by architecture, but then with the community, because there wasn't really a strong sense of community at the time I was up there. So I do think that's beautiful, but I had to leave. So I'm going to run you through a couple of kind of case studies of design opportunities that came up, but it was more the process, not necessarily the final thing that I want you to look at. I'll put a pause on that for a second. My firm is called Process Architecture. Originally, I didn't even want to name it that, but at the time, I used to have a business partner, and then he went on to other things, and it was the only thing we could agree on. But part of it was, I did want people to know that yes, we did architecture, and that the process meant just as much as the end result. It was more than just a means to an end. So in those early days, and even now, we were presented with opportunities where I'm just like, I don't want to do it. I don't like it. I think physically it's ugly. I want nothing to do with that work. And it's funny that when I was going through kind of our portfolio of stuff to think about, to find examples of, to talk about, it was all the stuff that I never wanted to do. Like opportunities that came about and I said, ugh, it was disgusting, or, you know, it was just the kind of work that I didn't want to do. So one example of that literally came out of the dumpster. There's and this is one way to kind of work the process. There's a little building in Winter Park on the golf course. It's a little house. And I think it used to be called the Starter's House. It's where you start your game. There's a pro shop there. It's not the country club. It's a little, like it was a shack. And for a couple years when I first started my practice, I was approached about, oh yeah, the city wants you to, you know, through a builder friend, we really want to get you involved with this project. You know, it was early days. I was thirsty. I needed the work. You know, we want you to put a couple bathrooms in this building. I'm like, I did not aspire to just do bathrooms. And I said no for 2 years. I did not want to touch the work. I really thought it was just an ugly, nasty building. Well, I ended up taking the job. And one of the things that happened was that this building, there was not a lot left when we got into it. Like we started demolishing things and trying to work it out to make it something better. And we realized that, you know, they had this $1 million view on a beautiful green golf course, and they wanted to put restrooms right in front of that. So we had them flip around the plan, and we worked with them. And when they started demoing the building, I noticed the dumpster. And the dumpster was filled with all of this wood. Stuff that they were just tearing out of the building that they didn't want, just normal construction waste. And then, so I said, wait a second, this to my former business partner, I said, let's go crawl up on that pile and see what's there. And it was a bunch of this beautiful old wood that they'd ripped out of the building. Not all of it was ruined or termite eaten and stuff like that. It was beautiful heart pine, like wood that's like 400 years old that you actually pay a lot of money for if you go try to find it to put it into new work now. So we immediately just started emptying the dumpster and building a pile next to the dumpster. And I said, are you thinking what I'm thinking? So we spent days, like the contractor wouldn't do it. We had to rip all the wood ourselves. And everything from like the cheapest, crappiest, like pressure treated to heart pine and some random things stuck in between. And it was all in the dumpster, and the city's like, well, we're not paying for it. And I said, well, this is a huge opportunity for me and my little firm. I'll do it anyways. So my partner and I built the wall with our own 4 hands. And it ended up becoming like a really interesting narrative that kind of came out of this project, because it wasn't just about finding something ugly and making it beautiful, but the city was nuts about historic preservation on this building and renovating it in a sensitive manner. And we realized that there was a huge tactile narrative that you could tell by revealing that history, like actually feeling it as you walk into the building. So, so yeah, this was all garbage. And it became one of the features of this little house-shaped building that people started to gravitate towards and love. And it was a great way to tell the story. So we realized some good things by doing that. And we wanted to make sure, in case it wasn't obvious, that you could learn about that story. So at the very last minute, without telling our client, who is the city of Winter Park, we went and had a plaque made, and then came in one day, drilled 2 holes in the wall, and stuck it there. And that's that silver piece you see that has a little narrative etched in steel. But this was an opportunity where I took trash and we you know, something that was disgusting and filthy and that was generally seen as garbage, and we made it something better. So that's one kind of, that's one way our process works, is we weren't just looking to take somebody from point A to point B to design a building or design an interior space such as this. It was trying to find something some greater narrative in the creative process that engaged the people who would use the building, whether they owned it or not, and that was just completely unforeseen. So that was a relatively successful job just because of that. And there's a lot of fond memories of building it. We spent, back before like we got busy, we spent 2 months sitting there building that wall. Now I don't have time for that. I wish I did. So it's just more of the same. It was another cool thing was, this is before they filled the space with stuff, but there's an old chimney. We found it. We just decided to leave it because it was a good, again, that tactile reference to history that people could touch and feel. So once again, I'm presented with, something like this. And it was, again, a disgusting building that I really didn't want anything to do with. It would happen to be behind my old office. And I think that, it was this weird little house in the middle of a parking lot where nobody in their right mind would want to live these days. Like 60 parking spaces and black asphalt around you. And this little house that was 700 square feet, split into two 350 square foot studio apartments. And it was the same idea or same process of like realizing, oh, there might be something there. And it wasn't a large project, but because it was in Mills 50 and because that neighborhood was starting to kind of like get a little bit of energy to it, a few just business associates and friends kind of started to rally behind it, which was really interesting around such small, insignificant work. And so a lot of what I like to do and what we do as architects is we take stuff away so it doesn't look like that anymore. You just kind of strip stuff back. And it was an interesting thing where nasty old building, the city didn't like it. The client was kind of 50-50 on whether or not he tore it down. And we had to argue with the city that people don't need to live there. They were going to force people to live there again. I said, nobody wants to live in the parking lot. Let's make it a relevant business that has some relationship with the street. And so that's what we did. There's like a little spa there now. And this is behind the Cameo Theater on Colonial Drive in the parking lot. So, so I don't think it always has to be a large opportunity. And I'm just kind of stepping away from architecture for a second. It doesn't have to be a large creative opportunity to be something that you can actually engage with or get people around you to engage with. A lot of the projects and just opportunities that I've encountered as a designer have been this type of thing that I didn't want, or that I felt that we were too busy to take on, or that there wasn't much there to grab onto. And I think that a lot of times that if you can just bring something to the table, and I don't mean just an idea, but it could be an idea, it could be the suggestion, simply an unorthodox suggestion that seems to always work well. And I know that's a very general thing to say, but it seems to work. Like sometimes we've seen structures like this in town, and we don't even know who owns it. We weren't even hired to do the building, but we approached them out of the blue and just said, we have an idea. We think we can make this relevant again. And we've done that with a couple things. And like completely unsolicited like architecture, just running up to somebody and saying, I have an idea, just listen to me for 5 minutes. And talking with some interns in the architecture profession, I try to impart that kind of idea on that group as much as I can, because I think that you don't have to wait around for the opportunity to come to you. Like Orlando is like enough good and ugly that people are receptive if you just walk up and say, I have a good idea. It's been a good town to support at least an architecture firm. And I think that applies in a much broader sense to a lot of creative industries here. So I appreciate the community for being that receptive. And I think that one thing that has helped me like working here more and being in the creative profession in Orlando is the relationship with community and the connection of that to just creative work in general. Insignificant projects like the ones I've shown you seem to have, at least in this environment, have the ability to engage people, and then they get excited or they make it their business, and good ways, not to hold you up or protest what you're doing. And I think that I didn't realize that when I came here 10 years ago, but I do now, that there's so many people that are interested in little bright spots of creative work. And I never would have seen that here 10 years ago. I mean, in fact, 10 years ago, I think I had a 10-year plan to leave. And now I don't mind sticking around. So again, this is one of those opportunities that came about when we were presented with something like this. And I was just kind of like, I don't know. I'm not sure if we want to get involved with this one. But again, this was during the time when things, at least a few years ago, were really slow and difficult for architects, and we needed the work. So interesting thing about Orlando is, and going back to like that first very abstract landscape image I showed you, like history in general and kind of the sense of place and community in Florida can be very subtle at times. It isn't always really intense and packed like this room. And you kind of have to search and find things to make them more obvious to people, whether you're trying to put an idea out there, a building out there, or something. It's not always that obvious. And so old buildings like this, when I told people that 1013 East Colonial Drive was going to be a project, they're like, what are you talking about? We don't even know where that building is. And it really didn't exist because it was sandwiched between the giant old Cruises Only building and an old supermarket. But there was an interesting history there. And this is where the community kind of made this project way more exciting. I think the community did more for this building than I ever did. There was like an article in the paper about Mills 50, which is, I owe a lot to because they supported us in our early days and as a firm, and they still are very kind of active with us. There was an appeal made to like, we were trying to figure out what it looked like. We had no idea what this thing looked like. We knew it was from 1940. It kind of sort of looks like an old theater. And so somebody saw the article in the paper where I think they interviewed the owner of the building and myself. And some guy, just some random guy, just decided to go spend 80 hours searching the Sentinel archives. And he came over to the office one day and he said, oh, I just want to show you this. I found this. And it was an image of the building back in the day, 1940. And it was a theater. But it had a very short lifespan. It closed like not long after it was opened, and then it became offices and got a floor in it, so you don't really know it's a theater. And unfortunately, I didn't put that image in this presentation. And it used to be called the Cameo Theater. So with, some guy came out of nowhere who I'd never heard of, just said, look, I've got something. I think this might help you out. Suddenly, the project had an identity because we were guessing. And that never would have happened had somebody just kind of in an unsolicited manner approached us and said, I find your thing interesting. I read about you in the paper, and I want to see if I can help you. And that happens a lot. I don't know if, that happens in other professions as much, but maybe because architecture is visible to some degree, that it was just easier for somebody to grab onto. But that was a real surprise. And so this is what it looks like now, and that's actually, I think, 2 days ago. There's a space in the bottom now, it's the Snap Orlando, which some of you may have spent some time at. It's a gallery of photography and always an interesting series of events there. Our office used to be upstairs until they leased the whole thing out. A place like this had no identity whatsoever, and we were kind of 50-50 and almost uninterested at one point because we didn't have much to grab onto, but somebody came out to us, they reached out to us, and they gave us something to work with. And so really, I don't have the image with me. A long time ago, I had a sign at the top that said Cameo. The city doesn't allow those now, so we had to work it through the city to allow them, or to allow ourselves to put a sign on the top of the building above the parapet again. So the building has come back to life as somewhat of an icon in terms of knowing it's the Cameo, knowing it's an address. And there's a lot of good stuff that goes on there in the evenings related to artwork, photography, and just events in general. It was quite an event there last Friday. So, so it's little bright spots like this in a context of ugly that seemed to be where our work has gone these last few years. And I never growing up when I wanted to be an architect starting in 7th grade, I never would have thought, oh, I want to go work where there are like lots of strip malls and generally everything's beige and flat. And it turns out that, like spaces like this and the alleyways behind them can actually be really charged, interesting design opportunities. And so that gets us excited now. And it gets me excited about working here. I think, and just the kind of the surprising community engagement with this space has been something that really, it feels good as a designer. And these are just a couple more images of the same thing. And I think that, you know, I think part of this goes back to working within an ugly context, and I'm not saying broad brush that Orlando's ugly, but there's a lot that's just not, as you well know in any creative effort, there's a lot that's just mediocre. And so I used to tell some people, and we still talk about it in the office, it sounds kind of silly, but one of the easiest ways to be successful as an architect in Orlando is just to do good design. And that's, I don't mean to sound pompous or anything, but it's incredible, the prevailing landscape in Orlando, how it can be very mediocre. And so it doesn't take much. And it can take a very simple structure, a very simple place that was kind of forsaken to rise above that. That's another thing, is we've always gotten into forsaken spaces. I don't know what it is, but maybe it comes from living in kind of a minimal landscape, and then I don't know what it is, but I've always been attracted to deserts and stuff like that. I think it's just maybe trying to grab onto something that might not be there right away, but I see it here in Orlando and in this kind of landscape that we have. So, you know, interesting stuff like this goes on there. So, art gallery, it's an art gallery. Photography goes on there. There's, I mean, I'm sure some of you have been there and seen what goes on at the Snap space. But it was fun being above that for a while. The little building I showed you, the 728 building, was supposed to be our office. We renovated it. It made it too expensive, and we priced ourselves out of our own building, so we couldn't even move in. So I guess that's good. I brought up the property value in the lease, but I couldn't afford it at the time. So this is kind of a snapshot of that. When I refer to landscape in Orlando, this is sort of very familiar to me. And early on, like before I even really incorporated the firm and everything, I was involved. I decided to engage, like willfully engage myself into the community by becoming part of the Mills 50 Main Street District on their design committee. All these Main Street districts around town might have a design committee to talk about making improvements to the neighborhood and cleaning things up. And those were in the early days of Mills 50, when there wasn't a lot of energy there yet. And they were like, you know, we need to help brand this district, and they were talking about banners and all that stuff that people normally do. And they brought up this idea of, you know, doing a bus stop shelter that might embody some of that, so that it would be specific to their district. And it's ridiculous that it's taken 4 years to get to this point, but they're being fabricated right now. And the interesting thing was, okay, so we designed an interesting bus stop shelter that Lynx is going to put a couple of them out there. The thing that was most inspiring about it was that we were walking on the street one day, and we saw someone who was visually impaired that was walking with a cane. And we walked up to them and said, you know, do you mind me asking, how do you know when you're going to the bus stop? Aside from, you know, using the cane. And they said they feel the cross sections of the signs. You know, like stop sign feels like this, whatever other sign feels like this. They have a different, you know, they feel different, and that was something that they used to see the signs. So we used that one little interaction with somebody, and that generated our column, which was something that was unique and different. And that if you felt one, you would always know that it was that kind of bus shelter, or at least the sign, if you couldn't fit a bus shelter there. So 4 years ago, and it's embarrassing and silly that I say that it's taken 4 years to get to this point, but they're finally, Lynx, we unsolicited, we just went to Lynx. And it was that same thing. Lynx was not looking for a bus shelter at the time. They had the regular whatever ones they do everywhere else. And we said, well, we have this idea. We want to tell you about it. And so there was a community meeting from Mills 50 one day, and we brought the rep from Lynx there, and he says, I've got to go talk to my boss right now. And so he left the meeting. And then, like, several years later, talking with commissioners, random politics, and government funding, it happened. They're being fabricated right now, at least 2 to start, because I think they want to make sure it actually stands up and does what I said it does. before they buy a bunch of them. But it was not just about creating something simple and functional and vandal resistant, but it has a series of LED lighting in it that responds if you step near it, or if a bus is approaching, it pulses, and things like that. A new kind of interactivity that was that also tied in the branding of Mills 50, which was kind of colors very much like this room. So that was an interesting, I call it a community design effort, because I would not have even touched this had I not started going out into the community and talking to people about, well, what can we do to improve our neighborhood? And then somebody saying, well, we don't have a bus stop shelter, would you mind designing one? So it ended up turning out okay. It's not there yet, but I'm hoping these first two go okay. This is a little former open air laundromat next to down from Will's Pub and Little Indies on Mills Avenue, and it was an opportunity of. And I'm saying opportunity a lot because it was an opportunity where we created something out of nothing, which in the early days when we didn't have much work, we had to do that. And I encourage everyone to do that. If you see something, and it doesn't have to be an architectural problem, if there's an opportunity to create something out of nothing, it can benefit you, not just financially and getting you work and all that, but when you build up that culture of the way you attack problems, people start coming to you more. And that happened as a result of this. We saw this building, which it still looks like this today. It's not like I did something yet. Approached the owner just out of the blue. There was a sign hanging in the front. It was for sale or for lease or something. And I said, we have an idea. It's clear as day. Chop this laundromat up into, like, just put glass around it, make it mini suites. A whole bunch of small creative firms like myself would love to, like, live in there. And so the owner said, okay, I'm into that. Let's pursue this. Long story short, he didn't want to pay for it, and even with a $20,000 facade grant from the city. So the thing has sat there and sat there and sat there. But then I'd given up on it. I told him, I said, take my renderings off your website, we're done. And I guess somewhere they're floating out there in cyberspace, and somebody approached me a couple months ago and said, I want to talk to you about this thing again. It looks like you have an interesting idea. How did you come up with this? I said, well, we just kind of made it up. We didn't even have a client at the time. And they liked that spirit in terms of coming to the table with that. But then they also thought, oh, I might be able to put a restaurant in there or something. So that's to be continued. It's kind of early talks right now. I don't know where that's going to go. But that, even though it hasn't turned into a project that's been realized yet, I like the idea of, and I used to say it a lot more when I go to work in the morning, I'd say I wanted to create something out of nothing as much as I possibly can, instead of waiting for it to come to me. And it wasn't necessarily about being aggressive or trying to, dominate conversation or be the big personality in the room. It was just about helping people see things that they might not be able to see right away. And because architecture is so visual and how we present, you do before and afters like this, people, it has a little bit more impact. So, so that's been very helpful as a small architecture firm in Orlando. I mean, I'm just a two-man firm, and I coexist in an office of two other architects who are here. Michael and Jose, where are you? You're right there. So I used to have a business partner, and he ended up leaving town and moving away, and I carried the business on. Around the time he left, I was looking for a new home, and Michael and Jose took me in at our office, which is, the space is called Midtown Architecture Studio, and it's located above Washburn Imports and the Imperial on Orange Avenue. And that has been an interesting and a very satisfying space to work. I've never had more fun in my life working in a space, and it's because of that spirit, and a lot of these ideas are flying around there quite often. It's not just, oh, let's wait for the next project to come. It's making an effort to go out there and engage people. And I don't mean hustling and trying to push architecture on people, but you'd be surprised at how many problems or just things that need to be fixed out there can be addressed with a design solution. And I think that design solution can come in the form of a building, everything to a font type. And for some reason, I don't know, I guess it's just over 10 years things have gotten better, this town is way more receptive to it than it used to be. Because I'm no longer on the 10-year plan to get out of here. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do here in the next 10 years. And so, you know, thank you, Michael and Jose, for welcoming me into that space, because that's probably the most creative and most satisfying space I've ever worked in my life. And it's a good feeling when you can go to work like that and have that. To kind of get off the architecture thing for a second, I don't know if there are any more slides. Oh, well, there was a rendering of what the building might look like if we turn it into offices. When I came to Orlando 10 years ago, I felt it to be as a creative person in architecture, it was very business architecture. It was like running businesses. It wasn't being a good designer. And that's evolved over the last 10 years, I think, just because of younger people coming to town. Like, I feel like the general average age of Orlando has gone down these last 10 years, where before I felt it was, extremely conservative when it came to architecture. And so I knew that the only way I was ever going to do what I wanted to do was to do it myself. And I felt that, you know, originally I was either going to go north from the University of Florida or south when I graduated 10 years ago. And I went here, honestly, because it was cheaper to start. And it just so happened there was a lot of jobs back then. But it was funny. It was about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, when I started my company. The guy who was going to be my business partner and I had it set. Like, we knew exactly, we had an outlook the day we were both going to resign and do our thing. And the company I was working for was like having terrible times, so I was laid off 2 weeks before I quit. So I got severance. And then somebody ratted out my former business partner, and like they were threatening to fire him. So it worked out well. And I think that generally this town is very fertile ground to do not just architecture, but any kind of creative pursuit. I think it's linking up better to other kind of venues and avenues and kind of channels or conduits to connect people together. An interesting case study that's not even in the slideshow. There's a place in College Park called Credo Coffee Shop, downtown Credo. And I don't know, is Ben here? I don't think he's here today, Ben Hoyer. When I first started my business, I used to sit in his coffee shop a lot because I couldn't afford to lease space. And just by sitting there and doing my thing, I wasn't necessarily trying to reach out at that time, people were very receptive. And it was a real surprise. Like, coming from an environment where working downtown, it was very conservative and standoffish in some cases. And so I got to know Ben, who ran Credo. And for whatever reason, he thought I was a halfway decent architect, and he decided to start talking to me more. And that led to a whole series of other things, weird angles in getting into things. Like, Ben's a very grassroots kind of guy, so he's way connected in ways that like go far and wide. And so because of happening to get to know the owner of a coffee shop, that connected us to much larger, bigger and better things, which kind of upsized the type of work we do and the type of design we do. We're doing work with Florida Hospital now, and like the old Princeton warehouse, and then getting involved with big corporations like Tupperware and supporting their brands and getting opportunities to like all this stuff I never would have suspected, but because I just happened to sit in a coffee shop and start doing my thing, that was very fertile ground when the area around it wasn't necessarily at the time. And it's paid back many times over. And I don't mean financially, but in terms of just satisfaction of doing good design and solving problems in town. So trying to tie this all up is that it's actually a pretty good place to work here, and it's pretty easy to go out there and get what you want. It hasn't been that hard. It's hard to do architecture, but it hasn't been hard in terms of realizing opportunity. It's just this place is rife with it. And so if I had to impart any kind of idea on everybody here, is that it's actually, you know, how do you say it? Whatever they're getting is good or something like that out there right now. It's very fertile ground. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and regardless of the path that you're pursuing, be it design or something that's business oriented, I think it's a really good time to do what you do here. And you know, I can get a room of people will show up and listen to somebody talk about architecture. Like, that didn't happen here 10 years ago, really. So thank you for your patience, and I apologize if I rambled.
So we'd love for you guys to ask Wes some questions. I'm sure you guys have some stuff.
Yes.
I applaud you for the work you've done, and thank you for being a barrier between the bulldozer and these, wonderful artifacts we have in our town. You had said that you'd take this work back then. You were slow, and you were, didn't even really like the town. You didn't want to do these projects, but you found the benefits of doing it. Now that you're not slow, and the current landscape is changing, tile roofs, and we're losing landmarks like the Mount Vernon Inn, the Booby Trap, Tom and Jerry's, all of Ivanhoe will be changing on the footsteps of your office. How do you feel about that now, and how will you continue? Will you continue to be that barrier?
If somebody wants to, like if I see a laundromat and I see some opportunity, I'll still take it on. Like I don't want to feel, I haven't risen above that work. Like if I lose that, I think I lose a lot of, to say it again, opportunity in terms of engaging really cool projects, engaging the community. And, I'm not going to necessarily, I'm not opposed to all of the stuff that's happening in Orlando. I mean, it's bringing in an interesting crowd, interesting careers. Places like IZEA are able to survive here and do very well. And so I'm happy that we are, Florida only has one industry, it's growth generally. It used to be seen that way, but now it's all kinds of exciting things like this. And so I know we still need that stuff to happen. So if you're asking me if would I still stand in the way of any of this new development or anything like that, that's kind of silly for an architect to do. But at the same time, that stuff is going to go on because it's bigger than me. But this town is still, you're still able to connect at this level, which is really interesting. It's not like it's not like you're muscled out. Even if you're just graduated and you're an intern. I feel like that before there was a barrier to trying to accomplish stuff. And I feel like that it was hard to do this, even though I described it like it was easier because I just went out and did it. I think that now it's easier for it's easier here now for people to rally around smaller things than it used to be. And that could be architecture, it could be graphic design, it could be interesting new business models. And so long story short is I think it's still really good and even better than it was 10 years ago.
Thanks.
Yes?
What's your dream Orlando project?
My dream project? She wants to know what my dream project is. In Orlando. In Orlando. It's funny. I was talking about this with the guys in the office the other day, and when I first moved here, I'd drive around town just to get to know things and orient myself. And I would see things like, whatever, the old laundromat or the Princeton warehouse or something, and say, oh, gosh, I love that old building. Like, there's a lot I've done with old buildings. Gosh, I wish I could just, one day I will touch that building. And for whatever reason, I have touched those buildings. For a long time, working in an old warehouse situation like the Princeton warehouse was something I was always interested in because there isn't much of that here. Not that kind of old texture of brick and steel because everything's so new. But if I had to have a dream project in town, I don't know. I really don't. There's not one thing that I'm holding out for. Before I die, I have to do that kind of work. I know I'm terrified at the thought of doing my own house. That's just, I can barely get anything done at home. But it's not really a type of project, but I've always wanted to do a building that's all black. I don't know. I haven't done it yet. I think it'd be really cool. But you know, people say, why would you want to do that? It's hot, and so it just hasn't materialized yet. But so it's not. I know I haven't really set a high bar. I just want to do something that's colored black, but simple pleasures because I'm so busy.
How much of your stuff is, like percentage-wise, is doing fun projects like that, and how much of it is doing
Stuff to pay the bills?
Yes, yeah, and like that kind of stuff actually feels more ugly to me than the fun stuff. Like what you're talking about, like is like the fun, beautiful stuff. I feel like the other stuff is probably your ugly thing that you don't want to do.
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, right now as an architect in Orlando, and the guys in the office might feel the same way, we're saying no a lot because we're busy. It's a good time to be an architect. There's a lot out there. So we don't necessarily have to take the work because we need it to eat. But I mean, I've done very straightforward projects before that are not going to be presented or not in my portfolio. But if I had to give a percentage of that, I think right now things are really good. You can run a firm on this stuff now. When before, like, I did have to take on some very straightforward renovations and move a wall here or there in somebody's office that, you know, was nothing really from a design standpoint that interesting. So I think as a result of the average age in this town, at least in my perception, is going down, and a general openness to good design and realizing the benefits of it, this stuff is all over the place. And, you know, I don't think the guys and I in the office are having to sort through, oh, you know, we've got 50% projects to pay the bills right now, and then, you know, when we're done with that, we can spend some time on the laundromats. Like 100% of the work in the office is like interesting stuff. Like I think it's all, I mean, there's a couple of like reliable old clients we have that continue to send us a couple of things, and you don't want to burn that bridge, but yeah, most of it's good. It's, you can run a practice on this stuff now, believe it or not. I think that's it. Oh, question?
I noticed that you had a lot of work on Colonial when you were presenting earlier. Are there any considerations for other areas, like boroughs in Orlando, that you keep in mind, like if you were to
One area that I would love to do something with, just from driving around and noticing it, is over, you know, what people call the Milk District, over by like the T.G. Lee plant and Beefy King. Had a similar situation over there years ago. There's an old gray office building across at 600 North Bumby. It's across from the whatever, the Walgreens or something that's on the corner, and it's abandoned. The windows are smashed out. I'm like, I want to do something with this building, and turns out another architect owned it. Ran through the whole scenario same as this, but long story short, he couldn't finance the job. I think that that area could be really fun to work in. If you stripped away a lot of the stuff that was there, in the 1950s, the old T.G. Lee plant was actually a really cool building. It had a milk bar in it, which I don't think anybody does anymore. And that strip behind it and the old Hoods Up gas station, gosh, that would be fun to work with. But just hasn't happened yet.
If you were going to buy a house for $200,000, where would you buy it?
200,000? You know, you can actually buy, it's funny, there's a lot, like I live in a part of Winter Park. My house backs up to General Reese Avenue, and I can walk to like the East End Market. Like that's where I live, that's where I come from. And, you know, everybody's like, oh, Winter Park, you can't afford a house there. I bought a house there like 7 years ago, and things were a little different. But there are old, beautiful, mid-century modern houses in my neighborhood, as is, going for like $140,000. Now, did you say build or just buy?
Well, either way, whatever.
I mean, I think you can do a modern, beautiful home for under $200,000. Not everybody wants to believe that or want to test it, but I think you can. You know, once you take care of the land and get that, I think you can do it. You know, what's interesting is, here's the thing that's changed in the last 10 years. When I came to Orlando 10 years ago, everything is sold on luxury, condos, everything's luxurious. And I'm just like, why does everybody have to have luxury? It just seems strange to me. Like, granite countertops is like the end all for everybody. And I can't stand granite countertops. And I think, you know, why not? I mean, a bunch of people like me who didn't have much money were coming to town as interns 10 years ago. Clearly, I was not the market for the people who were doing condos downtown, but even now, apartment buildings sold on luxury. And I'm like, what are we all what are we striving for here? I bet if I put up a sign that said straightforward modern living, a lot of people would be pretty interested in that. And nobody's done it yet. I'm just putting that out there. So if one of you want to do something with it, that's great. I think it's possible. Yes?
Do you have any thoughts, opinions about how it's interesting that you're working with Florida Hospital? It's something that's been on my mind, how hospitals are influencing and in some ways dictating urban planning in the areas that surround them. And I see it on both, it's not just Florida Hospital, but I see we're kind of bookended by that same.
Yeah, hospital to hospital, right. Hospitals grow like trees, like rings, and are often very poorly planned from an urban standpoint. They just kind of, oh, we need space, you know, and they just kind of go like this. And, you know, I think that you have to put it in some context here. There's a lot of employment and people who do very good things in their careers that are employed through healthcare in this town. During the downturn, just to give a quick sidebar to that, working in a firm 10 years ago, 2007, I said, this is not sustainable. Something's going to happen. So I left doing private development architecture, went to another firm that did healthcare architecture, which I just hate. It's just awful. And the economy crashed and all that went away. So I spent some time in the healthcare world, seeing what that was like. And I think, I mean, like all this stuff, I think there's tremendous opportunity. Here in town, do I have an issue with it, like having the presence that it does? You know, I remember when I walked away from the last firm I worked at, or was laid off from it, I said I will never touch healthcare again. I think it's just, ugh, you know, like I wanted to shake it off. And because of, I thought there was just a lot of unrealized potential in how you create space for people. And I was just thinking about it like from the architect's perspective. Nowadays, I'm seeing these healthcare entities in town reaching into places they never reached before in terms of creating, I don't think of it as like any kind of domination thing, but I think of it as like, well, they're thinking of non-clinical space and they're trying to connect to communities in ways I had never, ever would have suspected, which is weird and different, but I'm waiting it out and it looks like it might lead to some good things. I don't know yet. I don't speak like as an expert of healthcare and the politics of it, but I don't mind the presence. I mean, clearly it's a short walk from my office on North Orange Avenue. Florida Hospital's right there. And I'm not opposed to the growth. I just hope that if you're going to grow that big and physically just kind of account for that much space, I just hope you do it intelligently, because often they grow like trees, and it's just, as a physical building structure, it's very unattractive generally, and I just hope that that's managed better in the future. That's healthcare across the world, but I don't know if that answered your question, but that was my thought.
Yeah, one more.
One more? One more.
Been dying to ask an architect this for several years now.
Oh, this is it.
What the hell is up with spires? It's like every building I see, hotels, hospitals, one-story office buildings.
You mean like hats?
Putting these spires on top.
I don't know. Like, you know, some people, you know, I as a designer will do something, and you as designers will do something different than the other guy, the other man or woman who's doing that work. I don't know why that is done. You know, I bring a certain perspective to architecture. Michael and Jose bring a different perspective, and we all do things for certain reasons. Why? Some time ago in Orlando, there was an interest from the city standpoint, in kind of pushing buildings downtown to having more hats, which I think you've seen. They don't force that anymore. Why that happened, I don't know. That was just, you know, sometimes sometimes that's someone's idea of design, I guess. It's like, let's stick something on top, a little applique, you know, or in the absence of design, just do a wave. You know, you see that a lot. And I don't know why that's done. You know, it might mean a whole lot, and there might be real reasons behind it to the person who did that. And so I can't disrespect that, but because somebody could say the same thing about me in that laundromat. But I don't know why that's done, but it happens. Things are getting better, I'll just say that.
Well, guys, if you would join me in thanking